Duke Edmund Wycliffe placed the lighthouse keys in another man's hand and ordered his wife never to enter the tower again. Before the assembled keepers, he accused Duchess Clara of falsifying maintenance accounts and endangering every vessel along the Blackmere coast. For several seconds, nobody in the circular lamp room moved. The great lens revolved behind them with its familiar metallic whisper, throwing a blade of white light across the darkening sea. Clara stood beside the mechanism, with one hand resting upon the brass railing. The tower had belonged to her father before it became part of her marriage settlement. She had spent 6 years improving its reflectors, correcting its rotation, and teaching the keepers to recognize distress signals. Now Edmund held out her ring of iron keys to Sir Alistair Vane. Alistair accepted them with a shallow bow. "The Admiralty will be grateful for your Grace's cooperation." Clara looked at her husband. "Those keys are not yours to surrender." Edmund's expression hardened. He wore the same dark blue coat he had worn when presenting her lens designs to the coastal commissioners as evidence of Blackmere's progress. Then he had called her brilliant. Tonight, before the very men she had trained, he would not even meet her eyes. "The lighthouse stands on Wycliffe land," he said. "Its failures are therefore my responsibility." "There has been no failure." Alistair opened a leather ledger upon the work table. Several pages bore red marks beside purchases of whale oil, replacement mirrors, and copper fittings. £300 cannot be accounted for, he said. Clara did not touch the ledger. "Because that is not my account book." A murmur passed among the keepers. Her own records were bound in green leather, their pages numbered by hand. This volume was black, and the figures had been copied without the small notations she always placed beside emergency expenditures. Alistair smiled faintly. "The estate clerk identified your handwriting. Then either he lied, or you frightened him into saying so." Edmund struck the table with his palm. "That is enough." The sound echoed against the glass. Clara felt every face turn toward her. But humiliation was less dangerous than the object beside Alistair's elbow, a brass signal hood normally secured to the lamp assembly. It could narrow the beam, interrupt its rhythm, or redirect part of the light toward a chosen point along the coast. It should not have been lying loose. "Why was that removed?" she asked. Alistair placed one gloved hand over it. "The mechanism is being inspected." "By whom?" "By men who understand machinery." One of the older keepers lowered his gaze. Thomas Bell had served Clara's father for 27 years. She saw anger in the tightening of his jaw, but he had a wife with failing lungs and 2 grandsons dependent upon his wages. Clara would not ask him to sacrifice them for her pride. She turned to Edmund. "Give me until morning. I will bring my original ledgers, compare every entry, and demonstrate where these pages were altered. You had 3 weeks to answer Sir Alistair's questions. I answered all of them. You chose not to read my letter." A flicker of discomfort crossed Edmund's face. 3 days earlier, Clara had placed the letter in his hand. He had broken its seal, noticed that it concerned Alistair, and tossed it unopened onto the fire. He could not claim deception. He had chosen ignorance. "My decision is made," he said. "You will return to Blackmere House. Until this inquiry is complete, you are forbidden from entering the lighthouse or communicating with its keepers. And if a ship approaches tonight, Sir Alistair will protect it." Clara looked through the curved glass toward the black water below. Far beyond the rocks, 3 sets of masthead lights moved slowly through the channel. "They are coming too close together," she said. Alistair followed her gaze. "Merchant captains often travel in company. Not through the Blackmere Passage. The current forces them to separate before Widow's Reef." His expression did not change. but his fingers tightened around the keys. Edmund ordered 2 footmen to escort her down. Clara descended the spiral staircase without allowing either man to touch her. At the tower's base, she paused beside Thomas. "Count the rotations," she whispered. His weathered face remained still. "Every 7th beam," she continued. "Watch the western glass." Thomas gave the smallest possible nod. Outside, Edmund's carriage waited on the cliff road. Clara entered alone. Her husband remained behind with Alistair, discussing the inquiry that had already found her guilty. As the carriage rolled toward Blackmere House, she watched the lighthouse through the rear window. The beam swept over the sea. Once, twice, 3 times. Its pace remained exact. The bearings were sound, and the clockwork had not been damaged. Whatever Alistair intended, he had lied about the lens. Then a second light appeared beyond Widow's Point. It was low, yellow, and partially concealed by the ruins of an abandoned customs hut. To an approaching captain, it would resemble Blackmere's beacon seen through coastal mist. Clara struck the carriage roof. "Stop!" The coachman pulled the horses to a halt. Clara threw open the door and stepped onto the road. All 3 ships were turning west. Not one of them was following her lighthouse. She gathered her skirts and ran toward the cliff, shouting until her throat burned. The wind carried her warning back toward land instead of out to sea. Behind her, the carriage lamps flickered. Ahead, the false flame brightened. The first ship continued turning until its broadside faced the shore. Clara could hear nothing at that distance, yet she imagined the captain issuing confused orders as the hidden reef rose beneath him. A deep crack rolled across the water. The vessel's bow lifted violently, then stopped. The second ship struck moments later. By the time the third disappeared behind the rocks, bells were ringing from the harbor, and men were running toward the rescue boats. Clara reached the beach with her shoes soaked and her lungs aching. Broken timber already churned in the surf. Sailors cried out from the darkness, while villagers formed lines with ropes and lanterns. She waded in beside them. A wave drove a wounded sailor against her knees. Clara caught him beneath the arms and dragged him above the tide line. Blood covered one side of his face, and his fingers were closed around something sharp. "Where is your captain?" she asked. The sailor coughed seawater. "Light," he rasped. "Yes, you followed a false light." His hand opened. A triangular shard of blue glass fell into her palm. Clara recognized it immediately. It came from a colored signaling panel stored inside the locked cabinet at the top of the lighthouse. The sailor seized her wrist with surprising strength. "We never followed your light," he whispered. Then his gaze shifted past Clara toward the approaching cliff road. Sir Alistair's wagons were descending toward the wreckage before the harbor's rescue carts had even arrived. Clara closed her fingers around the blue glass and watched Sir Alistair's wagons descend toward the beach. They carried no blankets, ropes, or medical supplies. Their beds were empty, and each driver was accompanied by 2 armed men. These were not rescue wagons. "Keep him alive," Clara told a fisherman kneeling beside the injured sailor, "and do not let anyone take the glass from me." She hurried toward the wreckage, where villagers were hauling survivors through the surf. The first ship had split near its bow. The second lay on its side farther out, while broken crates drifted between them. Alistair dismounted before his wagons stopped. "Clear the northern beach," he ordered. "The cargo belongs to the Crown." "People are still drowning," Clara said. His gaze dropped to her wet dress, then to her closed hand. "You were instructed to return home, and you arrived with empty wagons before the harbor doctor." These ships carried government property. How did you know what they carried? Alistair's expression remained calm. The Admiralty informed me. Then why were they sailing without a naval escort? Before he could answer, Edmund rode onto the beach. He dismounted and crossed the sand toward Clara, anger masking the shock in his face. "What are you doing here?" "Saving the people your new lighthouse master directed onto the reef." Edmund looked toward the tower. Its white beam still turned steadily. "The light is functioning, yes. That is the point." The ships followed another flame. Alistair stepped between them. "Your Grace, grief has made the Duchess irrational. The captains likely mistook a fisherman's lantern for the beacon." "3 captains made the same mistake?" Clara asked. "At the same moment?" A sudden shout came from the water. 2 fishermen dragged a young deckhand ashore. He was barely conscious, but when he saw Alistair's men approaching the floating crates, he struggled upright. "Don't let them take those." One of Alistair's guards seized him. Clara moved forward. "Release that boy." "He is interfering with Crown business," Alistair said. "He is a shipwreck survivor under my protection." Edmund hesitated. That hesitation cut more deeply than Clara expected. Once, he would have trusted her judgment without question. Now he glanced toward Alistair before ordering the guard to loosen his grip. The deckhand collapsed against Clara. "They changed the signal," he whispered. "We saw white, then blue. Blue meant the passage was safe." Clara opened her hand and showed Edmund the shard. "This came from my signaling cabinet. The cabinet Alistair now controls." Edmund stared at it. For one fragile second, doubt appeared in his eyes. Then Alistair produced a folded document. "The Duchess signed an order 3 days ago authorizing the removal of the blue panel for repairs." Clara took the paper. Her name appeared beneath the instructions, written in a skillful imitation of her hand. Edmund recognized it. "You told me no equipment had been removed," he said. "I told you I had authorized nothing." Alistair pointed toward the signature. "The evidence says otherwise." Clara examined the ink. The shape of every letter was nearly perfect, but the date had been written as the 9th of October. She never wrote dates that way in technical orders. She used numbers to prevent exactly this kind of alteration. "This is forged." "Convenient," Edmund said quietly. Clara looked at him. "You watched me identify a false ledger. You saw a second beacon with your own eyes. A sailor has confirmed the blue signal. How much evidence must stand before you stop choosing the man who flatters you?" His face tightened. Before Edmund could answer, one of Alistair's men pried open a recovered crate. Inside were dozens of new naval pistols packed beneath a layer of medical bandages. Everyone nearby fell silent. Alistair immediately ordered the lid closed. The deckhand clutched Clara's sleeve. "Those weren't aboard when we left Portsmouth." "Then where were they loaded?" He pointed weakly toward the 3rd wreck. "There was another vessel beside us before the false light appeared. No lanterns. No name on her hull. A pistol cracked from somewhere beyond the rocks." The deckhand jerked in Clara's arms and fell against her, blood spreading across his shoulder. The shot had come from the direction of the abandoned customs hut, the same place where Clara had seen the false beacon. Clara pulled the wounded deckhand behind an overturned boat as a second shot struck the sand. "Get everyone away from the rocks!" Edmund shouted. The villagers scattered. 2 of his men ran toward the customs hut, but Clara knew the path above it. Whoever had fired could escape through a narrow ravine and reach the northern road unseen. She pressed both hands against the deckhand's shoulder. "The ball passed through," she said. "You may survive if we stop the bleeding." He was pale, but conscious. "My name is Samuel Reed," he whispered. They'll kill me if they learn what I saw. Who are they? Before Samuel could answer, Alistair approached with 2 guards. This man must be taken into Admiralty custody. Clara moved between them. He needs a surgeon. He is a witness to the theft of naval weapons. He is a witness against you. Alistair's face hardened. Stand aside. Edmund reached them before the guards could touch her. Samuel goes to Blackmere House, Clara said. My physician can treat him there. No, Alistair replied. The Admiralty has jurisdiction. Edmund looked from the wounded sailor to the pistols inside the recovered crate. His jaw tightened, but once again he chose the security of Alistair's authority over Clara's warning. Take the sailor to the estate infirmary, he ordered. 2 guards will remain outside his room. No one speaks to him without my permission. Clara stared at her husband. You still believe you control what is happening? I am trying to prevent panic. You created this panic when you handed my keys to the man whose wagons were waiting for the wreck. Edmund flinched, but Alistair interrupted. The Duchess should be confined. Her forged orders and missing funds already make her a suspect. Several villagers heard him. Clara saw uncertainty spreading across their faces. That was Alistair's real purpose. He did not need to prove her guilt tonight. He only needed to make every truth she spoke sound like desperation. Clara turned to the fisherman. Carry Samuel to Blackmere House. Mrs. Vale will prepare the infirmary. They obeyed her before Edmund could repeat the order. That small act of loyalty drew cold fury into Alistair's eyes. Clara followed them, but near the cliff path she slipped the blue glass into the lining of her sleeve. If her room was searched, it would not be found easily. At Blackmere House, the physician began working on Samuel immediately. Clara waited until the ball had been removed and his wound bandaged. Then Edmund entered. You will remain in your apartments until the coastal commissioners arrive tomorrow. And Samuel? He will be questioned when he wakes. By Alistair? By me. Clara looked at the blood on Edmund's cuff. He had spent hours helping survivors from the water. The compassionate man she had married still existed, but only when kindness demanded no sacrifice to his pride. Why do you want Alistair's approval so badly? She asked. I want the Admiralty seat he can help me secure. And how many people must drown before that seat becomes too expensive? Edmund's face went still. You will not leave this house. He walked out and locked the door from the corridor. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she crossed to the window and opened it. Her apartment stood 1 floor above the eastern garden, but an old stone gutter ran beside the wall. As a girl, she had climbed more dangerous cliffs to inspect her father's signal posts. A pebble struck the glass before she could descend. Thomas Bell stood below. Clara lowered a curtain cord, and the old keeper tied a small oilskin packet to it. Every 7th rotation, he whispered, just as you said. She pulled the packet up and opened it. Inside lay a strip of recording paper, marked with the lighthouse's timing intervals. 6 rotations were correct. On every 7th, the beam had been covered for 12 seconds, long enough for the false blue signal to draw the ships west. There was also a torn page from the new duty log. Clara recognized the name written beside the 7th rotation. The keeper supposedly operating the signal had been dead for 5 years. Then Thomas looked toward the drive. Your Grace, he said urgently, Sir Alistair has returned with constables. A moment later, someone hammered on Clara's door. Duchess Wycliffe, called the magistrate, you are under arrest for deliberately causing the wreck of 3 ships. Clara pushed the oilskin packet beneath the false bottom of her sewing box just as the door opened. The magistrate entered with 2 constables, followed by Alistair and Edmund. Alistair carried a burned lantern in one hand. "This was recovered from the customs hut," he said. "It bears the Duchess's initials." Clara examined the silver plate fixed to its base. The initials were genuine, but she had donated that lantern to the harbor rescue station 2 years earlier. Dozens of men have used it. Only your signaling glass was found inside. He opened the lantern. A second fragment of blue glass rested behind its shutter. The evidence had been arranged too neatly. Her lantern, her glass, her supposed signature, and her accounts. Alistair had prepared every answer before the ships touched the reef. The magistrate unfolded the arrest warrant. "Duchess Wycliffe, you are accused of interfering with a coastal light, falsifying official records, and causing the deaths of His Majesty's subjects." Clara looked at Edmund. "Did you authorize this?" The magistrate acted upon the evidence. "That was not my question." Edmund glanced away. Clara understood. Her husband had not merely failed to defend her. He had given Alistair permission to use the Wycliffe name against her. The constable stepped forward. "One moment," she said. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table between herself and Edmund. "I will not wear the symbol of a man who delivers his wife to prison, because reading her evidence would inconvenience his ambition." His face lost its color. "Clara, you burned my warning. You surrendered my keys. You allowed my name to be forged, and now you stand beside the man profiting from the wreck." Alistair smiled without warmth. A moving performance. Clara turned to the magistrate and offered her wrists. "No irons are necessary," he said, visibly uncomfortable. "You may travel in your own carriage." "No, I will walk through the village." Edmund stared at her. "Why would you choose public humiliation?" "Because I have nothing to hide." Outside, survivors and grieving families crowded the drive. Whispers followed Clara as the constables escorted her toward the village lockup. Some called her murderer. Others lowered their heads in shame. Near the gates, Thomas stood among the lighthouse workers. Clara glanced once toward the eastern window of her apartments, then touched 2 fingers to her palm, the signal her father had used for retrieve and protect. Thomas understood. The lockup contained one narrow cell with stone walls and a barred window facing the harbor. Clara had barely sat down when Mrs. Vane arrived carrying food. "The Duke permitted me 10 minutes, the housekeeper said. How is Samuel?" "Alive, but Sir Alistair moved him from the infirmary." Clara rose. "Where?" "No one will tell me." Mrs. Vane set down the basket. Beneath the bread lay Samuel's blood-stained shirt. A line of tiny black numbers had been written inside its cuff. Clara held it close to the lantern. They were cargo marks, 3 ship numbers followed by dates and quantities. Beside the final entry, Samuel had drawn a crude lighthouse and the Roman numeral 7, every 7th rotation. The wreck was not an isolated attack. The numbers documented earlier shipments. Clara folded the shirt as footsteps approached. Edmund appeared outside the bars. "I can have you released into house confinement," he said, "but you must stop accusing Alistair until the commissioners arrive. You are offering me comfort in exchange for silence. I am trying to protect you. You are protecting your admiralty appointment." His expression tightened. "If you continue this, your reputation may never recover. 3 ships were destroyed, Edmund. Men died. My reputation is not the emergency." For a moment he had no answer. Then a bell began ringing at the harbor, not the slow toll for the dead, but the rapid warning used when a vessel approached the reef. Clara moved to the window. Far out at sea, a large passenger ship was sailing toward Blackmere. The lighthouse beam swept once, twice, then vanished on its 7th rotation. A blue flame appeared at Widow's Point. and the passenger ship began turning toward it. "Release me," Clara said. Edmund stared through the barred window at the passenger ship turning toward Widow's Reef. "The magistrate has the key. Then take it from him." The blue flame flashed again. The ship corrected farther west, believing it was entering safe water. Clara gripped the bars. "There are hundreds of people aboard. If you wait for permission, they will die." Edmund ran into the corridor. A moment later, Clara heard an argument, followed by the scrape of metal. He returned with the magistrate and ordered him to open the cell. Alistair appeared behind them. "The prisoner cannot be released during an active investigation." Edmund turned on him. "My wife is the only person who understands the signaling system. The wrecks were caused by her system." "No," Clara said as the door opened. "They were caused because Edmund gave you access to it." She did not wait for either man to answer. Outside, the harbor master had prepared 2 rescue boats, but they could never reach the passenger ship before it struck. Clara climbed onto the harbor wall and studied the vessel's remaining distance from the reef. "We must show them the true channel," she said. "With what?" the harbor master asked. "They no longer trust the lighthouse." Clara pointed toward the eastern cliffs. "Light 3 fires in a straight line from St. Agnes Hill to the harbor mouth. Then fire the signal cannon twice." The harbor master hesitated. 2 shots mean danger to starboard." "Exactly. If they turn east immediately, the current will carry them beyond the reef." Alistair seized the man's arm. "You will follow Admiralty procedure." Clara stepped between them. "Your procedure has already destroyed 3 ships." The fisherman looked toward Edmund. For the first time that night, he did not look at Alistair. "Obey the Duchess," he ordered. Men scattered through the village. Barrels of pitch were hauled up St. Agnes Hill, while the harbor cannon was loaded. Clara watched the ship continue toward the blue flame. The first fire appeared. Then the second. The third refused to catch. "Oil!" Clara shouted. A woman from the rescue station ran forward with a lamp can. Flames surged upward just as the cannon fired twice. The passenger ship remained on its deadly course. "Again," Clara ordered. The second pair of shots rolled across the water. At last, the ship's sails shifted. Its bow turned east, slowly at first, then sharply as the captain understood the warning. The hull passed Widow's Reef by less than 100 yards. A cheer rose from the harbor. Clara did not join it. She watched Alistair instead. He was not relieved. He was furious. "The commissioners will hear how you interfered with an authorized signal," he said. "They will also hear that my interference saved a ship." Alistair leaned closer. "If you believe 1 rescue will erase 3 wrecks, you understand very little about the evidence waiting against you." He walked away toward his carriage. Edmund approached Clara. Relief had softened his features, but she stepped back before he could touch her. "You saved them," he said. "We saved them because the villagers trusted me after you declared me unfit to command. I was wrong about the lens. You were warned before anyone died." The words struck him harder than anger would have. Thomas arrived from Blackmere House with the oilskin packet hidden beneath his coat. He handed it to the magistrate in full view of the crowd. "These are the lighthouse records," Clara said. "They prove the beam was deliberately covered on every 7th rotation. The duty log names a keeper who has been dead for 5 years." The magistrate examined the papers, then turned toward the road Alistair had taken. "The arrest order will be suspended until the commissioners arrive. It should be withdrawn." "Suspended," he repeated. Clara accepted the small victory. Her cell door would remain open, but her name was not yet cleared. At Blackmere House, she went directly to the infirmary. The bed was empty. A length of blood-stained bandage lay on the floor, and one of Edmund's guards had been struck unconscious beside the window. The physician insisted Samuel had still been too weak to stand. On the pillow rested a folded note. Clara opened it. "Bring the blue glass and the cargo numbers to the customs hut before dawn. Come alone, or the sailor dies." Beneath the message was a fresh smear of Samuel's blood. Clara did not intend to obey the instruction to come alone. She copied Samuel's cargo numbers onto 2 separate sheets. One went to Thomas, with orders to deliver it directly to the coastal commissioners. The other she sealed inside a letter to the commander at Portsmouth. Then she wrapped an ordinary piece of blue bottle glass in cloth. Edmund found her fastening a dark cloak. "You are not going to the customs hut. If I do not, Samuel dies. This may be a trap." "Of course it is." He reached for his pistol. "Then I am coming with you." Clara stopped him. "The men who took Samuel passed your guards, entered your house, and knew exactly which room held him. Until we identify who is helping Alistair, I trust no one under your command." The accusation wounded him because he could not deny it. "What do you expect me to do?" "Go to the lighthouse. Replace every man Alistair appointed. Secure the signaling cabinet, and keep the true beam burning." "You expect me to remain behind?" "I expect you to repair one consequence of your decision." Clara left before he could object. Thomas waited near the garden wall. He followed her at a distance with 2 fishermen, while Mrs. Vale took the letters toward the northern post road. Clara reached the customs hut shortly before dawn. The ruined building stood above the rocks, its roof partially collapsed. A single lantern burned inside. Samuel sat tied to a chair, his wounded shoulder soaked with fresh blood. Beside him stood Mr. Pritchard, the Wycliffe estate clerk. The same man who had identified Clara's forged handwriting. "I wondered how much Alistair paid you," she said. Pritchard raised a pistol. "Place the glass and the cargo list on the table." Clara set down the wrapped bottle glass, but kept the original numbers hidden inside her glove. "Release Samuel first." "You are in no position to bargain. I am the only person who can explain what those numbers mean." His eyes shifted toward her hand. That was all the confirmation she needed. Pritchard did not merely want the list destroyed. He feared Clara had already interpreted it. "The numbers identify ships," she said. "Not only last night's vessels. They correspond to 4 earlier wrecks, officially blamed on storms." Pritchard's grip tightened. "Each ship carried naval weapons that were never listed on its manifest," Clara continued. "Alistair transferred the stolen crates aboard shortly before the false signal appeared. After the wreck, his wagons recovered them as supposed crown property. You know nothing. I know he has been stealing government weapons, concealing them inside doomed ships, and using the lighthouse to erase every witness." Samuel lifted his head. "The dark vessel," he whispered. "That was where the pistols came from." Pritchard struck him across the face. Clara stepped forward, but the pistol turned toward her. "You forged my accounts," she said. "You copied my signature and used a dead keeper's name. I did what was necessary. For money? For survival. Sir Alistair promised protection when the investigation began. He will kill you before he protects you." A floorboard creaked outside. Pritchard heard it. He seized Clara and pressed the pistol against her ribs. "Tell your men to enter." "No." He dragged her toward the rear door. On the table, the false blue glass caught the lantern light. Pritchard saw its rough edge. "This is not lighthouse glass." Clara drove her elbow into his chest. The pistol fired into the ceiling. Thomas and the fisherman rushed through the front door as Clara tore free. Pritchard fled through the rear passage, but one fisherman caught him near the cliff path. Thomas cut Samuel's ropes. Clara searched the hut, Beneath a loose plank, she discovered copies of shipping schedules, bills of sale from foreign arms dealers, and payment orders bearing Alistair's seal. Then she found a letter addressed to Pritchard. It ordered him to destroy the customs hut and every document inside before sunrise. Clara smelled smoke. A thin orange line was already moving along the floorboards toward 6 barrels marked as lamp oil. Samuel stared at them in horror. "That is not oil," he said. "It is gunpowder." The rear door slammed shut from outside. Pritchard had escaped and locked them inside the burning hut. The flame reached the first barrel. Clara seized Samuel beneath his uninjured arm, while Thomas drove his shoulder against the locked rear door. It did not move. "The roof!" Clara shouted. "The western side has already collapsed." One fisherman climbed onto the table and tore at the rotten ceiling boards. Smoke thickened around them. Samuel could barely stand, and Clara felt blood soaking through the bandage beneath her hand. Thomas found an iron hook beside the fireplace. Together, he and the fisherman dragged down enough timber to open a narrow gap. "Take Samuel first." They lifted the sailor through the opening. Clara gathered the shipping schedules and Alistair's letters into her cloak, but a burning beam fell across the table, scattering several pages into the flames. "Leave them," Thomas shouted. "These names are the only proof of where the weapons were sold." She crawled beneath the beam and recovered 2 bills of sale. Heat blistered her fingers, but she held them against her chest and climbed toward the opening. The first barrel exploded. The blast threw Clara through the broken roof. She struck the ground hard enough to lose her breath. Thomas pulled her toward the rocks as the remaining barrels detonated, destroying the customs hut in a column of fire. From the lighthouse, Edmund saw the explosion. He had dismissed Alistair's new keepers and restored the signal cabinet when the flames rose above Widow's Point. Leaving Thomas Bell's son in command, he rode toward the ruins. He found Clara lying beside Samuel, her cloak burned and her hands bleeding. For one terrible moment, he believed she was dead. "Clara." She opened her eyes. Edmund dropped to his knees, but she pushed herself upright without accepting his hand. "Pritchard escaped," she said. "He forged the records." Edmund stared at the remains of the hut. "My estate clerk? Your clerk, your guards, your signature, your lighthouse. Alistair used everything you gave him." The truth no longer sounded like an accusation. It sounded like an inventory. Thomas helped Clara stand. She withdrew the surviving papers from her cloak. One bill documented the sale of naval pistols to a private buyer in France. Another listed quantities matching Samuel's cargo numbers. Edmund read Alistair's order to burn the hut. "This is enough to arrest him." "No," Clara said. "It proves smuggling and attempted murder, but Alistair will claim Pritchard acted alone. We need the original Admiralty manifests and proof that Alistair ordered the false signals." Hooves thundered along the cliff road. 3 official carriages approached, accompanied by mounted officers. The coastal commissioners had arrived earlier than expected. Alistair rode with them. He dismounted wearing a clean coat and an expression of solemn concern. "Thank God you survived, Duchess." Clara held up the burned letter. "Your concern came with gunpowder." Alistair barely glanced at it. "Mr. Pritchard has already confessed." Edmund stepped forward. "Where is he?" "In the custody of the commissioners." 2 officers brought Pritchard from the rear carriage. Blood marked his temple, but he remained upright. He looked directly at Clara. "I falsified the Duchess's records on Duke Edmund's instructions," he announced. "His Grace ordered the wrecks to conceal weapons he intended to sell abroad." Edmund went still. "That is a lie." Alistair handed the chief commissioner a bundle of documents. Each bore Edmund's signature and seal. Payments for the dark vessel, authorization to transport weapons through Blackmere, and orders granting Alistair complete control of salvage operations. Clara recognized the signatures as genuine. Months earlier, Edmund had signed the papers without reading them because Alistair had promised him the Admiralty appointment. The Chief Commissioner faced him. "Duke Wycliffe, did you sign these orders?" Edmund looked at Clara, perhaps hoping she would find a simple forgery and rescue him from his own carelessness. She could not. "Yes," he admitted, "but I was deceived about their purpose." Pritchard laughed bitterly. "The Duke always has another person to blame." The officers surrounded Edmund. Alistair turned to Clara. "Your name can still be cleared. Confirm that your husband directed the operation, and the Crown will regard you as another of his victims." Clara understood his plan. Alistair had arranged two endings. Either she remained the criminal, or Edmund replaced her as the architect of the conspiracy. In both versions, Alistair escaped. The officers took Edmund's sword and placed him under arrest for theft of crown weapons and treason. As they led him toward the carriage, the lighthouse flashed across the cliffs. 6 correct rotations passed. On the 7th, the beam went dark again. Thomas's son had been left alone inside the tower, and Alistair was standing on the road with the only other set of keys. Clara counted the rotations again. The 7th beam vanished for precisely 12 seconds. Someone inside the lighthouse was still operating the signal hood. "Stop the carriage," she ordered. The Chief Commissioner raised a hand, and the officers holding Edmund halted. Alistair looked toward the tower with carefully measured surprise. A mechanical defect, no doubt. "No," Clara said. "A damaged lens would weaken every rotation. A covered beam disappears at a fixed interval. You are hardly impartial. I built that mechanism." She turned to the Commissioner. "Thomas Bell's son is alone inside. If the 7th rotation is still being concealed, then someone has entered the tower, or he has been forced to operate it." The Commissioner ordered 4 officers to accompany her. Alistair moved toward his horse. "I shall inspect the tower myself." Clara blocked his path. "Give the Commissioner your keys." His hand rested over his coat pocket. "You have no authority to demand them." "But I do," the Commissioner said. For the first time, Alistair's confidence faltered. He surrendered the ring of keys, though Clara noticed one iron key was missing, the narrow service key that opened the sea entrance beneath the tower. They hurried across the headland. At the main door, Clara found no sign of forced entry. Inside, a broken lantern lay on the spiral staircase. Drops of blood marked the steps. "Edward Bell!" Thomas shouted. There was no answer. They found his son unconscious in the lamp room, his wrists tied behind the central column. He was breathing, but a deep wound crossed his forehead. The signal hood had been connected to the turning gear with a length of wire. Each time the lens completed its 7th rotation, the mechanism pulled the hood across the beam automatically. Alistair pointed at the arrangement. The Duchess designed the machinery. Who else would know how to alter it so precisely? Clara ignored him and knelt beside the gear assembly. The wire had not been attached at random. It passed through 2 small pulleys fixed beneath the platform. Both pulleys were new and bore the mark of Vane Maritime Works, Alistair's private manufacturing company. She loosened one with her burned fingers and handed it to the Commissioner. "I have never purchased equipment from Vane Maritime." Alistair's expression remained controlled. "My fittings are used throughout the coast. Then your sales records will show who ordered these. They were probably stolen. Like my lantern? Like my glass? Like my signature?" The Commissioner placed the pulley inside an evidence pouch. A sound came from below, not footsteps, the scrape of a bolt. Clara ran down the stairs. At the base of the tower, the service door stood open. Beyond it, stone steps descended toward a narrow landing where a small boat was pulling away. A man sat at its oars. Thomas recognized him. George Hales. One of the keepers Sir Alistair appointed. An officer fired into the water beside the boat. Hales dropped the oars and raised his hands. They dragged him back to shore. Inside his coat, the officers found a duplicate lighthouse key, blue glass dust, and a pocketbook filled with rows of numbers. Hales refused to speak. Clara studied the pocketbook. The entries appeared meaningless, groups of 7 digits divided by short lines. But the 7th figure in every group corresponded to a lighthouse rotation. The remaining numbers matched distances and bearings from Blackmere. "It is a signaling schedule," she said. The lighthouse told the dark vessel when to approach, where to transfer its cargo, and which ships had been selected for the Reef. The chief commissioner compared the dates with Samuel's cargo list. 4 matched earlier wrecks. A 5th matched the 3 ships destroyed the previous night. The final entry bore that day's date. Beside it were the letters RNC and the number 12. "Royal Naval Cutter," Edmund said from the doorway. The officers had brought him into the tower under guard. Clara looked toward the sea. "A cutter is expected at noon?" The commissioner's face darkened. "The Resolute. It carries investigators and the original Portsmouth weapons manifests." Alistair gave a dismissive laugh. "You are constructing fantasies from a criminal's notebook." Clara pointed to the final bearing. "The Resolute will approach from the east at 12. The numbers direct the dark vessel to intercept it beyond the headland." "For what purpose?" "To destroy the manifests before they reach Blackmere." "And how would anyone know the cutter's confidential route?" Silence filled the tower. The commissioner turned toward Edmund. Edmund closed his eyes briefly. "I knew." Clara felt the remaining warmth leave her face. "Explain." "Alistair told me the investigators were coming to inspect your accounts. He claimed their report would determine whether I received the Admiralty appointment." Edmund looked at the floor. "He asked for the cutter's arrival time so that he might welcome them formally." "You gave him a confidential naval schedule?" "Yes." "After burning my warning?" "Yes." "After signing his transport orders without reading them?" Edmund met her gaze at last. "Yes." Each admission stripped away another excuse. Alistair stepped forward. "The Duke's confession proves nothing against me. If anything, it confirms that he possessed the schedule and the authority to arrange the attacks." "No," Edmund said. His voice was quieter, but firmer. "It proves I was vain, careless, and willing to distrust my wife because you promised me power. Those were my choices." "But Clara opposed every order connected to these wrecks, and you knew it." The commissioner studied him. "Are you prepared to make that statement under oath, even if it establishes your negligence in the theft of Crown property?" Edmund looked at Clara. She offered him neither forgiveness nor encouragement. "Yes," he said, "I will surrender my correspondence, my political accounts, and every private agreement I made with Sir Alistair. The decision would likely cost him the Admiralty seat, his public reputation, and perhaps control of the Wycliffe estates during the investigation." It was the first useful sacrifice he had made. Hales suddenly broke from the officers. Before they caught him, he reached the lamp table and knocked the pocketbook into the flame. Clara lunged forward and pulled it free. Several pages burned, but the final entry survived. Beneath the coded bearing, another message had been written in tiny letters. "If the cutter reaches Blackmere, ignite the Western magazine." Clara looked through the tower glass toward the harbor warehouses. Edmund had recently allowed Alistair to store emergency lamp oil inside the Western magazine. She now understood what the barrels contained. "How much gunpowder did you place in my harbor?" she demanded. Alistair smiled. Then a cannon sounded from beyond the eastern headland. The Resolute had arrived 2 hours early. At the same moment, smoke rose from the Western magazine, and every warehouse along the crowded harbor stood within reach of the coming explosion. "Ring the evacuation bells," Clara ordered. "Clear the harbor and move every survivor beyond St. Agnes Hill." The chief commissioner sent officers toward the village, while Thomas hurried to the lighthouse bell. Its iron voice rolled over Blackmere in rapid, urgent strokes. Below, smoke thickened above the Western magazine. Alistair remained surrounded by officers, yet his calmness disturbed Clara more than panic would have. He had planned for the magazine to burn. He must also have planned how to escape the blast. Clara turned to Hales. How was the powder ignited? He stared at the floor. She seized the half-burned pocketbook and showed him the surviving final page. "Alistair has already blamed Pritchard. He will blame you next. Help us stop the explosion, and the commissioner may remember that you helped save the village." Hales glanced at Alistair. "If you speak," Alistair said, "you will hang." "If he remains silent," Clara replied, "hundreds may die beside him." Hales broke. "There is a fuse beneath the old rope warehouse. It runs through the drainage tunnel into the magazine." "How long?" 20 minutes from the first smoke." Clara knew the tunnel. Her father had built it to carry storm water away from the harbor warehouses. At high tide, an iron sea gate prevented water from flowing backward. The tide was rising now. "If we open the sea gate," she said, "the tunnel will flood." "And drive seawater directly into the powder magazine," Thomas added. The commissioner ordered 2 officers to take Hales toward the gate mechanism. Clara followed. Edmund stepped after her, but his guards held him. "Let me help." Clara stopped only long enough to face him. "You can help from the tower. Warn the Resolute away from the eastern headland." "I do not know the signal." "You would if you had read the book I gave you on our first anniversary." The shame on his face told her he remembered the unopened volume. Thomas handed Edmund the signal chart. Under guard, he climbed to the lamp room while Clara ran toward the harbor. Families were fleeing uphill. Fishermen carried injured sailors from temporary shelters. The smoke above the Western magazine turned black. At the drainage gate, Hales pointed to a rusted wheel fixed into the seawall. Thomas and 2 officers strained against it. The wheel would not move. "Alistair ordered it sealed last month," Hales said. "He claimed it leaked." Clara examined the central pin. Fresh iron had been hammered through the mechanism to prevent the wheel from turning. She took an officer's pistol. "Stand back." Her first shot struck the pin but failed to break it. The second bent it loose. Thomas drove a hammer beneath the damaged iron and tore it free. They turned the wheel together. The sea gate opened. Water rushed into the drainage tunnel, carrying enough force to knock 1 officer from his feet. Beneath the warehouse floor, the burning fuse hissed and disappeared, but smoke still poured from the magazine roof. "The fire reached the outer barrels," Hales warned. Clara ran to the building. Through a broken window, she saw flames spreading across spilled powder toward the stacked barrels. Thomas caught her arm. "You cannot enter. The flood is rising from below. If we roll the nearest barrels into the water, the rest may be saved." Before he could stop her, Clara wrapped wet sacking around her shoulders and went inside. Heat struck her face. She reached the first barrel and pushed, but it was too heavy. Then Edmund appeared beside her. "What are you doing here?" The Resolute received the signal. "She has turned south." "You were ordered to remain under guard." "I was. They are outside." He put his shoulder against the barrel. Together, they rolled it toward the flooded tunnel. It fell into the water with a heavy splash. Thomas and the officers entered behind them, and within minutes, the remaining exposed powder was submerged. A section of roof collapsed. Edmund threw himself between Clara and the falling timber. It struck his back, driving him to his knees. Clara and Thomas pulled him clear as the last flames were extinguished. Outside, Edmund struggled to breathe. "Did we stop it?" he asked. "The village is safe." He closed his eyes in relief. Clara looked toward the eastern sea. The Resolute had turned south as instructed, but the dark vessel was following it. "We still need to warn them about the attack." She hurried back to the lighthouse. Alistair and Pritchard were gone. One commissioner lay unconscious beside the road. 2 horses were missing. They rode toward the northern cove, an officer said. Clara understood. The dark vessel had not followed the Resolute merely to destroy it. Alistair intended to board his own ship and escape with the stolen weapons. At the tower, Clara adjusted the signal shutters herself. She flashed the naval code for hostile pursuit, followed by the dark vessel's bearing. The Resolute answered with 3 cannon shots. Its sails shifted. Instead of fleeing, the cutter turned directly toward its pursuer. The dark vessel attempted to escape north, but 2 naval boats were already lowering into the water. Clara descended from the tower and joined the officers riding toward the cove. Edmund remained behind with the physician, unable to mount a horse. They reached the shore as Alistair and Pritchard rowed toward the dark vessel. The Resolute fired across its bow. The smuggling ship stopped. Naval sailors surrounded it from both sides. Alistair tried to throw a leather case overboard, but Samuel, watching from a rescue boat despite his wound, caught it before it sank. Inside were the original weapons manifests, payments from foreign buyers, and letters instructing Alistair's men to select ships with few surviving witnesses. There was also a list of every official he had bribed. The naval commander placed Alistair and Pritchard in irons. By afternoon, the coastal commissioners assembled survivors, keepers, sailors, and villagers inside the Blackmere courthouse. Clara's arrest warrant was laid upon the central table beside the recovered evidence. Before the hearing began, the commander handed her one final document from Alistair's case. It was the original agreement granting him authority over the lighthouse, salvage wagons, and harbor stores. At its bottom stood Edmund's signature. But above it, in Edmund's own handwriting, were 6 words Clara had never seen. "My wife's objections are to be disregarded." The courthouse doors opened. Edmund entered under guard, knowing that clearing Clara's name would require him to read those words aloud before everyone he had taught to doubt her. Edmund stood before the crowded courthouse and read the sentence in his own handwriting. "My wife's objections are to be disregarded." No one moved. He placed the document on the table. "Sir Alistair did not forge those words. I wrote them. Duchess Clara warned me about missing equipment, false accounts, and unauthorized activity at the lighthouse. I ignored her because I wanted an admiralty appointment and because admitting she understood the coast better than I did wounded my pride." Alistair shifted in his irons. Edmund continued. "I surrendered her keys, dismissed her keepers, burned her warning, and allowed her authority to be used against her. Sir Alistair designed the wrecks, but my choices gave him the lighthouse, the harbor, the confidential schedule, and the Wycliffe seal." The chief commissioner called each witness. Thomas presented the timing record, proving the beam had been covered every 7th rotation. Samuel testified that the weapons were transferred from the dark vessel before the false blue signal appeared. Hales identified the pulleys, duplicate keys, and signaling code. Pritchard's forged accounts were compared with Clara's numbered green ledgers. Finally, the naval commander opened Alistair's leather case. The original manifests showed that Alistair had stolen weapons from Portsmouth, placed them aboard selected merchant ships, and directed those vessels toward Widow's Reef. His salvage wagons then recovered the crates, allowing him to sell the weapons abroad while the sea destroyed witnesses and evidence. The commissioners formally withdrew every accusation against Clara. Alistair was charged with murder, theft of crown property, smuggling, attempted destruction of a naval vessel, and conspiracy. Pritchard and Hales were charged as accomplices, though Hales's cooperation would be reported to the court. Edmund was cleared of deliberately planning the wrecks, but not of responsibility. He resigned his claim to the Admiralty appointment and surrendered control of the Lighthouse under the terms of Clara's marriage settlement. He sold 2 unentailed properties to compensate the families of the dead, repair the harbor, and support survivors who could no longer work. Then he faced Clara before the villagers. "I publicly called you dishonest and unfit. I now state publicly that you were truthful, capable, and correct. I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only that the record show the harm was mine." Clara accepted neither his hand nor the wedding ring he had brought with him. Through their solicitors, they signed a formal deed of separation. Blackmere Lighthouse and its operating income remained under Clara's independent administration. Edmund moved to a smaller inland property and agreed not to interfere with her work. Months later, the restored lighthouse reopened. Clara appointed Thomas chief keeper. Samuel became an assistant signal officer after his recovery, and a rescue fund was established for sailors' families. Beside the tower entrance, she placed a bronze memorial bearing the names of everyone lost on Widow's Reef. Edmund attended the dedication, but remained behind the crowd. When the ceremony ended, he approached Clara. "I once believed remorse entitled me to return," he said. "Now I understand it only obliges me to repair what I can." Clara looked toward the sea, then continue repairing it. She did not promise another beginning. At sunset, she climbed the tower and placed her hand upon the lamp mechanism. The repaired lens began to turn, sending an uninterrupted beam across the water. Thomas offered her the iron ring of lighthouse keys, the same keys Edmund had once placed in Alistair's hand. This time, Clara took them for herself.